There we
We've sorted
go.
out the tech. Good evening. Hello.
Good evening. Welcome to Food Intolerances.
So for those of you who don't know me, because I know you've been communicating with Laura, I'm Claire Snowden-Darling.
And I am Laura Knowles.
We always say that in our podcast, don't we? And we are really excited to talk to you about food intolerances. And one of the reasons that I am so excited about this is because we're going to talk about all of this in a bit more depth, but as practitioners today, we see a lot of people who are unwell, just really unwell. I mean, that's sort of stating the obvious, but actually it's not, because I know when we trained, predominantly it was people with a bit of IBS, a bit of bloating, some headaches. We're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing people coming into our clinics really unwell. You know, we're seeing people with, and that's the bit they're normalizing. It's actually the headaches and stuff they still can't handle. But, endometriosis, PCOS, we're seeing autoimmune diseases, we're seeing, inflammatory bowel disorders. And none of these things are things that we work on as complementary therapists, but we're seeing them in clinic. And the thing that excites me the most is it was this huge aha moment for me when we'd gone through, to the highest levels of our training, where I would be getting people coming into clinic and I'd be sitting down and I'd be going, okay, yeah, you're here for something to do with, I don't know, whatever it might be, this issue or that issue. And then I'd realize that they'd seen physiotherapists, nutritionists, they'd seen acupuncturists, they'd seen doctors, sometimes the very best on Harley Street. They'd seen everybody. And they were seeing functional medical practitioners, some people spending £30,000 a year on functional medical practitioners, having all these IV drips, having all these tests. And I would just literally be sat there looking at their diet going, why has no one taught you about food intolerances? And it's something that is a real mainstay in the therapy that Laura and I both are trained in, and one of the therapies we teach, kinesiology. But again, even in kinesiology, I see people learning food intolerances as a really nice technique. And then I see people going about their lives as kinesiologists, carrying on eating all the things that they're intolerant to, and then saying that they've got symptoms. And it occurs to me that people really didn't understand how big an issue food intolerances are. And so we can talk about food intolerance, and it sounds a bit benign, doesn't it? Like, oh yes, I have a bit of hay fever. Sounds really benign, except the difference is with food intolerances, these are foods that we could be eating up to 5 times a day. And so the dosage and the exposure is immense. And I truly, truly, truly believe, alongside a couple of other things that we're going to talk about tonight, I truly believe that food intolerances are one of the major root causes of chronic health issues today. Which is a big statement, and we're going to back it up in this handy, lovely, nifty presentation that we've created. Laura's created. I don't create the PowerPoints. She's brilliant.
That's my job. Okay. This is us.
Yes. Shall I start with this one? Okay, so we are the College of Functional Wellness. Okay, so what we offer is accredited training in kinesiology, functional wellness, nutrition, and emotional coaching. And all of this developed because of our journeys of ill health. And during that journey, we have both been let down very much by both the medical model and the holistic model. And it was because of us not getting the answers to our health issues well, this is how it works. I have an idea, then Laura goes and researches the hell out of it, and then actually proves it or disproves it, which I love, and it works really well for us. And basically, through some kind of divine intervention, I came up with this concept of the triangle of hormonal health, which we have now had proven to us over and over and over again. Whoever's got their audio on, could you mute it, please? That would be really great, thank you. And now all that we keep seeing is more and more research that actually proves this model. So that's great. And in our work, we focus on what we call the 6 pillars, and they sound like hugely different pillars, but what you're going to see is that they aren't. And those 6 pillars are blood sugars, stress, hormones, digestion, immune issues, and emotional transformation.
I think what's amazing about what we've put together with the work that we've done and what you're going to see in this presentation is food intolerances. We're going to talk you through the different types of food intolerances that we see with our clients. But what I love and what I'm excited to talk you through is how that fits with the rest of the body. And this 6 pillars, the blood sugars, the stress, the hormones, the digestion, the immune, how they all fit together. And if you've got a client who is eating foods they're intolerant to, you will see those 6 pillars going out. And so we will, that's what I'm excited about with this presentation, is that we will talk you through those different parts. And some of you are joining us because you are part of our diplomas and also our Nutrition for Health. But we did decide to open this classroom up to others who are interested in this topic. And so it's a good example of having an experience of us in a classroom and having an experience of our work and our approach when we work in clinic.
So we are in the middle of a global health crisis. I love that we actually wrote this before this slide before the pandemic, and then the pandemic came around, and still in the global health crisis, we don't really talk about the pandemic, which I find very interesting, because this global health crisis has been around a lot longer than COVID-19. So the global health crisis is that there are 80% of adults 65 plus that have at least one chronic condition, and 68% have 2 or more chronic conditions. And that's 65 plus. But the truth is, we are seeing the beginnings of these really much earlier in people's life. And we talk quite a lot in our work about precursors, that we start to see red flags and precursors in people's early life. Now, these are the big 10 chronic conditions for adults of 65 plus. And so hypertension, high blood pressure, and what's interesting is you'll start to look at how many of these are medicated. High cholesterol, 47%, arthritis, 31%, heart disease, ischemic heart disease, 29%, diabetes, of course. I'm surprised it's not more than that, but we have pre-diabetes as well. Chronic kidney disease, heart failure, depression, Alzheimer's disease and dementia. We've got some juicy information for you later on that one. And COPD. So these are the big 10 issues that are affecting adults of 65 plus. So if we have this global health crisis, and quite a lot of this is we are able to apply medication to, but quite a lot of it we can't. And so for something like ischemic heart disease, there is medication, you'll be put on medication, but a heart disease isn't necessarily a medicatable, they'll medicate the symptoms, not necessarily the root cause. But that's what you start to find with a lot of the medications that for these chronic conditions, is we're medicating the symptom and not the cause. And so then what happens is people end up with the side effects of the medication, they end up with further conditions, because the root cause, if you're then suppressing the root cause, it's just going to start creating other conditions. And it becomes very, very common that people have a whole litany of these chronic conditions by the time they are heading into more mature years. And we have normalized ill health as part of aging. And in quite a lot of the indigenous tribes where they're living on a diet that is more species appropriate and living a more species appropriate lifestyle, they're not seeing these common signs of, we're getting older. They're not seeing those becoming endemic within their tribes. So we have to start looking at, well, what is it that's causing all of these problems in our population? And like I said, this is talking about it in 65 plus. But we are seeing the precursors, and by precursors, I'm talking about things like migraines, IBS, acne, joint pain, brain fog, terrible menopause, PCOS, endometriosis, or any symptoms that people are experiencing where there is any kind of chronic response, inflammatory response in the body, are precursors to these major chronic conditions. And so we have to start asking why. I mean, I never saw children in my clinic when I started. It was rare. I think I had like a couple. I'm seeing young children now with chronic issues. So what we have to address is that there is, climate change is a big problem, because it is changing our, like, how the seasons affect us, so our circadian rhythms, but equally it's also causing a problem with our crops, and we have huge amounts of pollution. Pesticides, the food chain depletion, our NHS is struggling. Medication usage such as the Pillars and HRT is a big issue. Chronic health conditions, including the ones that we've got over here, but also obesity, of any inflammatory condition, hormone imbalances, and cancer we have now normalized as 1 in 2. Now, I remember growing up and cancer was probably about 1 in 6, maybe it was starting to tip into 1 in 5, and it was terrifying, but it was far away. How have we now normalized it's 1 in 2? That is absolutely terrifying. And I truly believe that holistic practitioners are no longer a nice to have. We are essential, but we're still considered the last resort for many. And it's because they don't get any answers from the doctors, or the doctors just want to go fully down the big medication and surgery route, and people are looking for other options. So that big list that we were just talking about has started to tip us into something that we call the 4 realms. And so when I was talking about, the medication will stem symptoms but doesn't necessarily deal with the root cause, as kinesiologists, our job is to get into the root cause, and there can be a multitude of root causes. It's not always just one specific thing. It can be a combination, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But we look at issues that are happening within the 4 realms. Now, the realms, it's a word from the kinesiology world, but basically it's the ways that human beings are made up. And so we are made up of the biochemical, so literally the biochemistry of our body and what we put into it, the electrical, because our body works by electricity, our brain works by electricity, the emotional aspect of us, and the structural aspect of us. So that would be the 4 realms. And so this is where therapies also sit. So biochemistry, by the biochemical realm, will be very much the realm of nutrition. Electrical could be your acupuncture, your Reiki. I'm only giving a couple of examples here. Emotional, your counseling and your coaching. And structural would be things like massage, chiropractic, osteopathy, PT, etc. And with kinesiology and with our functional wellness, we really are looking at all of it. So what causes the issues in the realms? Oh, well, this one's a really chunky one at the biochemical, because we are currently in a soup of pollution for the human body. So at the top, because this is the subject of tonight, but it is always at the top of this one, is food intolerances. We are eating foods on a daily, sometimes multiple times in a day. In general, not all of us, but most of us are eating foods that we are intolerant to. That's then combined with the fact that most people have got a poor diet. And even that phrase is quite contentious, because there are so many health myths that people actually think they're doing the best thing for themselves when they're not. And that's a really huge issue. And supporting people to be able to see past the health myths and actually come back to really common logical sense with the research aspect added to it is I actually think where our job is most needed right now. There's chemical toxicity coming at us from all angles, in skincare, in cleaning products, in pesticides, and in pollution. We have got depleted nutrition. There is a massive lack of minerals such as magnesium in our soil because of the pesticides. The worms can't get to the food and then poo around it, which is how we get our nutrition. So that our food is nutritionally devoid. Many people are dehydrated, and even those who are drinking a lot of water, if it's not filtered water or such, the quality of our water is so poor. It was illuminating. I was in Slovenia in February, and they don't treat their water with chemicals. It all comes from the Alps, and their water was just astonishing. And it really brings to mind to me how bad our water quality is. It's, you know, full of medications, it's full of all sorts of horrendousness and chemicals. Medications, contraception, and hormone replacement. So many people are stuffed full of all of these, and a lot of that is causing as many problems as it's sorting. Alcohol and addictions obviously causes a big biochemical imbalance. Reduced sunlight and vitamin D. So not only do we have reduced sunlight, then we have been well trained that as soon as that sun's out to slip, slap, slop and get that sun cream on. But that is causing a huge amount of vitamin D deficiency. And then lastly, but very much not least, radiation. I could wax lyrical about the issues that we are having on this planet with radiation. And, you know, we just keep changing what the level is of safe radiation, because we have no choice. We just keep going, well, yeah, that's safe. And it's not at all. Just the radiation from, I mean, I go on about Chernobyl, but like that didn't go anywhere. That radiation didn't go anywhere. We've had other nuclear leaks since then, so Fukushima. They don't go anywhere. We're a hermetically sealed ball. It doesn't go anywhere. So our poor human body is not coping with the amount of biochemical stress that is being put on it. Then we come on to the electrical. So dehydration is also an electrical one, because it's how the electricity flows through our body is through good hydration. EMF radiation and devices exposure. I mean, no one's very far away from their devices, are they, these days? And it's there all the time. And again, huge pressure being put on the human body. And then light toxicity, and some really interesting research coming out now around light toxicity and what that actually means for us as animals who are supposed to have circadian rhythms. And then, I mean, the emotional, this is just a small list because we couldn't cover all of the topics, but basically anxiety, also one of the most medicated conditions in the UK, depression, ditto, overwhelm is everywhere. People having, you know, relationship pressure, social pressure, inequality, how much of that is being exposed now and is there, but that can add so much stress to the human body. Social media pressure, low self-esteem is at an all-time high, fueled by social media, magazines, etc., and consumerism is causing that too. It's, you know, everything is designed to make us think that we're not good enough without this thing. So financial and work pressure, obviously. The pandemic does feature, because I think the last 2.5 years have been very stressful for everybody in one way or another, and then addictions as well. And then we go on to structural. So this is where poor posture puts a huge amount of pressure on the body, lack of exercise and movement, or sedentary lifestyles, or over-exercising, or doing the wrong type of exercise, or the right type of exercise at the wrong time of day. So exercise can basically be a huge stressor. So we are in a situation where basically we are running out of bandwidth. And so what I mean by that is, I kind of like the word stress, but everything that you've just seen in those bees it's like a stress soup. We are in a stress soup. And our bodies have run out of bandwidth. That's absolutely what we're seeing. And so I love this concept of bandwidth, because we get that really clearly, don't we, from, you know, Wi-Fi. But if I've got, okay, well, just to be alive today, there's stuff I can't do anything about. I can't do anything about the fact that Chernobyl exploded and caused a load of bother, and now I've got radiation floating around the earth that we know the dust is around. It's completely, you know, within us, it's everywhere. If you've seen Dark Waters, all the issues with PTFE, like, these are things I can't change, nor can I change them for my clients. So there is already part of my bandwidth taken up with that. Then there's bandwidth taken up with, you know, family pressure. Then there's bandwidth taken up with, you know, other things I can't change. Pesticides, you know, even if we eat just pure organic food, we're going to be exposed to pesticides because we're a small little island and we spray a lot of our crops with them. So if my bandwidth is like this, and I've already used up loads of it. I've now only got a tiny bit, and then, you know, something happens, the car breaks down. I just don't have the resilience to be able to handle everything that's being thrown at me and anything else. And it's actually this lack of resilience that is causing the body to go into basically stress overload, which is essentially where inflammatory conditions come from. And every single one of those conditions that we were talking about at the beginning is an inflammatory condition. Interesting. So it's this resilience we need we need to get back. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit more about resilience. Is like, you've given a list of all the things that we cannot change, which can feel really disempowering. But this is why we wanted to put this talk together. This is why food intolerances is at the heart of what we do, because avoiding eating foods we're intolerant to is something that we can change. It is something we can do something about. And what it allows is it takes the pressure off the body so that it's able to deal with all the stuff that we can't change.
Yeah, and you know what I really love about that is it's really common that people will say, oh, I'm intolerant to this food, but I went away on holiday and I had some and I was fine. And I go, yeah, where were you dealing with all your day-to-day stressors? You weren't. So your body had that resilience to be able to handle it. The body is meant to be able to buffer things. I mean, I watch, you know, smokers, and smoking is the thing that makes me realize how phenomenal the body is, because its whole purpose is to detox and bring us back into homeostasis. And, you know, when you think about what we're doing with smoking, and some people so heavily, and yet they manage to, you know, very often keep going. And yes, people do get chronic diseases from smoking, of course, because they get to the point where there isn't the bandwidth anymore. But very often they don't. And that just shows that their body has got this capability to deal with this, which could be partially genetics, could partially be diet. Who knows? They might live a much, you know, different outdoor lifestyle. But ultimately, it's about whether or not your particular body has got the bandwidth to handle what's being thrown at it. And you're absolutely right, Laura. That's why we love talking about food intolerances, blood sugars, all the things that we're talking about, because it's the one thing we can definitely change.
Absolutely. Now, we split intolerance symptoms into two categories, this life affecting and this life limiting. And I think what can be surprising here is some of these are quite obvious food intolerance symptoms. People recognize digestive symptoms, they recognize fatigue or mood, but not so many practitioners and not so many members of the public recognize things like period instability or acne or frequent infections or autoimmune diseases or Alzheimer's to be linked to food intolerance. And so this was quite an eye-opening moment for me when I was able to make these connections and understand that the food that we're putting in our body absolutely creates these conditions. And I'm a big fan of listening to the body and listening to the symptoms. The symptoms are warning signs that something is going on, and it is asking us, it's calling us into finding out and discovering where is this coming from. And one of the things that we do time and time again is if we have someone who's coming into the clinic with something and we've done our kinesiology, or we've done our coaching, or we've done our supplements, I like to go back to, right, we need to go over food intolerances because there's something we've missed.
And then so commonly either something slipped back in or it's just something further up the hierarchy of food sensitivities, which we're going to talk to you about, because it's our bodies evolve and change as well. And so there's something glaringly obvious here.
I also think what you're saying is that when people go on holiday and they cheat and they have a sandwich or whatever and they go, oh, I digested that fine, I didn't get my IBS, I must be fine for it. I do think that we forget and we just, you know, reintroduce those foods again. And so our job as coaches, nutritionists and kinesiologists is to go back to those basics and go, right, can we just check, where are we at? What are you eating for breakfast, lunch and dinner? Let's revisit this, because there is maybe something that they've gone, oh, I thought that was fine. Oh, I didn't realize couscous was wheat, for example. So it is really important to revisit these if you've got something that you cannot get under. Oh, I love this. I mean, what we're about to talk through, if you've come across any of our work, you may recognize some of these models, because we adore them, because we keep coming back to them, because they just make so much sense to what is going on in the body. And what we've done here is go over these models that we use again, from the viewpoint of food intolerances. How does food intolerances fit in to the rest of the body? Go.
So, welcome to the Triangle of Hormonal Health. Some of you will already know this because this is absolutely what you're studying. The concept behind the Triangle of Hormonal Health is essentially what we were just saying, that there are red flags and precursors to chronic conditions. Nothing comes out of the blue. Nothing comes out of the blue. The symptoms might be different, but the precursors, the body was telling you. So as a practitioner, it's very rare. There is a bit of I'll start at the beginning. So Triangle of Hormonal Health, I was getting excited. Triangle of Hormonal Health, basically 3 sets of hormones that interact with each other. And at a basic level, when these 3 sets of hormones are interacting beautifully, when everyone's playing well, we feel great. But as soon as there is an issue with one of these sets of hormones, we start to feel unwell. So I always use the analogy of it's a stool, and we need the legs of the stool to be equal so that we get this full balance going on in our body. But as soon as one of our legs becomes wonky, it starts to put a lot of pressure on the other 2 legs, and that ultimately they will take each other down, and our stool falls over, and we end up with symptoms left, right, and center. But we only need one of those to be a bit wonky to start to have those precursor symptoms. What tends to happen? So people don't tend to come in, they might come in and say, oh, I'm really stressed. I need a good massage. I need to relax. I'm really stressed. But they don't come in saying I've got an imbalance with my stress hormones, unless they've actually had something diagnosed. And that's not common. Unless somebody has got diabetes, where they think of it as diabetes, they know it's to do with blood sugars, but they're not thinking before they get diagnosed with diabetes, I've got a problem with my blood sugars. They don't come in saying that. The only caveat is that people do sometimes come in saying they've got problems with their sex hormones because they're having period problems or fertility issues, or I think it might be a hormone issue. But what they don't realize is that all of these are hormones that are interrelated. So we need really our blood sugars, our stress hormones, and our sex hormones all to be working in this really lovely optimal fashion, and then we're well. If they are not working in an optimal fashion, the first things that kind of start to show as an issue is the digestive system and the immune system. So it could be one or the other or both. That's really why people are often seeking help from the doctors and from complementary therapists. I've got bloating. I'm a bit constipated. I go down with everything that goes around. I get all the bugs that come back with my kids from school. These are the things that people are sort of talking about. And some of those other things that we were talking about, the skin, I can't remember that list now. There was such a great list. That list that Laura put up, yeah, the acne, the
headaches, the brain fog,
yeah,
the energy, the fatigue.
All of those are the precursors to I've got really bad IBS. And I'm talking about some people have got IBS so badly that they can't work. Like they are on the toilet 40 times a day. The immune, obviously, it will start to play up, and we get really bad allergies. We'll have it'll sort of start with, say, maybe some hay fever, then it gets worse and worse and worse, and then we're starting to become intolerant to the world. We will be getting things like psoriasis, eczema. But again, asthma, eczema, psoriasis, we have normalized in society. These are just, they're an autoimmune disease, but they're not really a bother. They're an autoimmune disease. And the problem with autoimmune diseases is that at the core, it's a very, very stressed immune system that is trying to tell you something. And when we don't listen to it, you can stick the cream onto the eczema to your blue in the face, and you can take the asthma inhalers. But when there is an autoimmune response in the body, it's very common for it to then create other autoimmune responses. And when people are very far down the rabbit hole of having an autoimmune response, they can have 7 or 8. And they get very often bigger and bigger until it's your ankylosing spondylitis, which is where all your bones are, crumbling and fusing, or MS, the real biggies, the life limiting ones, not that I've got a bit of eczema and it's a bit annoying. So these are the reasons that people tend to be coming in. And what we wanted to talk about is how food intolerances is actually one of the main drivers that takes your stool from being steady to squonky. Nobody wants a squonky stool. So here's why. So this is usually we're talking about blood sugar roller coaster, and we're usually talking about it in terms of like how to eat a balanced diet. What we're talking about it in relation to here today is how food intolerances affect this. So the line in green is where our blood sugars should be, just like this nice sort of like up and down. We shouldn't really get to the point where the body needs to produce huge amounts of insulin. And we shouldn't get to the point where you can see in that trough where the blood sugars drop so low that we have to produce cortisol, the stress hormone. The cortisol made in the adrenal glands, its job is to put sugar into our muscles and our bloodstream to give us the fuel to get away from danger. That is cortisol's job. But what we tend to see with firstly a bad diet is that people will be waking up in the morning. So blood sugars rise naturally overnight. Cortisol spikes overnight. So that's one of the things that wakes you up, is that your body going, I've got a load of sugar in my blood, must get out of bed, and also must get some food. And so then as soon as our blood sugars go to a certain like high level, we will produce insulin to bring them back down. Now, annoyingly, we don't get down to where we should be, where the green line is. We will get down directly proportional to how high we were. And then standard sort of diet, let's say piece of toast, some cornflakes, people are eating a bit of granola, porridge, all carbohydrates. This is what we teach in nutrition and the diet work, which spikes the blood sugars. And then we have to produce insulin again, and the blood sugars drop. And then maybe about 11 o'clock, we're hungry. And so we'll eat a banana, blood sugar spike. And so we just do this all throughout the day if we're not eating a very balanced diet. That's it for diet. However, and this was the, oh, wow moment. Obviously, if we do this loads and loads, we end up with diabetes. We can get diabetes alone from stress. Now, bearing in mind, I don't like the word stress, and I prefer the word stressor. And the first stressor that we talked about through the realms is food intolerances. If you are eating a food that you are intolerant to, the second you put it into your mouth, and the rest of your food could be perfect. But if you're eating a food that you're intolerant to, your body will produce cortisol. Now, this was the kagunk, penny dropping moment. Every time I put food in my mouth, I'm going to have a hormonal response. And that hormone response will either be one that takes me to wellness or one that puts me in inflammation, because it will be cortisol. So that will either be because it's high refined carbohydrate, or it's a food I'm intolerant to. So we could end up, firstly, diabetic alone from a stress response from food intolerances, and blood sugar roller coasting all over the place if it's not diabetes, which will be then causing a huge amount of the inflammatory conditions that we were talking about. Because what we don't want to do is produce cortisol. We're having to produce cortisol just to get through life. The whole job I see actually as being any kind of wellness coach today is to highlight to people where cortisol is getting into their system and how to remove it. So, and then holding their hands to make the big decisions of, okay, I need to give up Diet Coke, or I need to give up this, or I need to give up that. Okay. But that's where these chronic inflammatory conditions are coming from. In fact, there was that great book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it's basically talking about how the human condition today is one of an inflammatory response. And the inflammatory response is coming from cortisol, always. And the cortisol is usually, it's coming from all those places we talked about in the bees. But the bit that we can change is through diet and not eating foods we're intolerant to.
One of the things I like to do with clients is to help them become aware that when they are eating foods, of recognizing the response they have 10 to 20 minutes later. And if there is a food that someone is intolerant to, it is very common that that cortisol release will speed up the heart rate. It will make us become more alert. It actually can be quite an addictive feeling because it feels quite buzzy. But if we can feel, maybe if we go to bed at night and you're lying down and you've had a dinner where you've had food intolerances, often you can feel your heart racing. And that is the cortisol hormonal response to food that is essentially an enemy, a stressor in your body, and your body is having a reaction to.
Your body is having to go into battle, in this diagram, 4 times in a day, 4 or 5 times in a day, literally going into battle. So in terms of taking up bandwidth, that is a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah. So when we are eating foods that we're intolerant to, and we are producing insulin and we are producing cortisol, we're producing these hormones that are responding to the stress, we are affecting something called our endocrine system. And our endocrine system it's how we function. It sends all the messengers around the body to get us to do the stuff that we need to do. It's getting us to sleep, it's getting us out of danger, it's helping us sweat, it's keeping us warm, or it's starting our periods. It's all of the things to make our bodies work. And our endocrine system works beautifully as a family. And one goes down, it'll take the others down with it. And so this is where we are starting to see that if we are eating foods that we're intolerant to, and we are producing high levels of insulin in the pancreas, and we're producing high levels of cortisol and adrenaline in the adrenal glands, that's 2 of the glands that are going down, we are going to start seeing issues in the testes and ovaries. So that's our sex organs. We're going to start getting period problems or low sex drive. Thymus, there's our immune system. Thyroid, that's weight gain, that's our temperature, that's our energy. Metabolism. Pituitary gland governs the whole kit and caboodle, but this is where we're starting to get headaches and fatigue. The pineal gland for sleeping, and serotonin, feeling good, depression, anxiety. And this again was an eye-opening moment for me when I learned this, because it was the first time that I was able to start putting all of these symptoms together and to actually have an answer of where they're coming from. And so this is why it's so important that we are not eating foods that we're intolerant to, because we are going to start seeing symptoms in the endocrine system, because the endocrine system is overwhelmed anyway with all the stress that the toxic soup that we have to live with.
And so this is where it starts to become so interesting when we start thinking about things like long COVID, because there's so much talk about it right now, and it's like no one's asking the question, where does it come from? Like, it's not come from the COVID. And actually we've just renamed it. The chronic fatigue societies are in uproar because ME, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, been around a long time, and long COVID is those by any other name. And what no one's talking about is how millions of people did not have the bandwidth. It's post-viral syndrome. And so, looking at that thymus, looking at those adrenals, looking at everything that Laura's just talked about, it is absolutely the body going, I did not have the resilience to be able to handle this thing. And so exactly as you just described it, it's knocked out so many parts of those endocrine that now we're not functioning properly. That's, any of those post-viral issues. So why is that? Well, what happens when we are receiving danger signals? So we receive danger signals from 2 places. We receive danger signals from our hypothalamus, which is the central nervous system sort of hub in the brain. And that would be messages that are being received from our senses, eyes, ears, nose. I can smell burning. I can see a train coming towards me. That plate is hot. those messages that say that there is danger. And so those are the quick fire, I need to get out of danger now, quickly, this instant responses. The other place that we get messages about danger are through the pituitary gland. So as Laura said, that governs the whole kit and caboodle. And the pituitary gland is responsible for creating a lot of hormones. And I found out recently that hormones means to put in motion. Isn't that great? So the pituitary gland will be responsible for creating a lot of hormones, but also if it's not creating them, it will be asking the other glands to make them. And so those two, so for example, I really, really, really need a wee or my bladder's going to burst, would be a danger signal of I've got to get out of the situation, I need to go and have a wee. I am so hungry, I'm going to pass out. I'm like you, any of those, I'm so cold, I need to do something about it. Those are all messages from that the pituitary will get. And to get us out of that danger, both the hypothalamus and the pituitary have a conversation, this green line, with the adrenals and say, hey guys, can you make some cortisol, please? And the adrenals go, yeah, I'm going to make the cortisol. And it makes the cortisol, puts it into the bloodstream. And then it sends this memo in red back to the hypothalamus and the pituitary that says, I've done the job, stop sending the message. Except that was 20 minutes ago. And that was in response to the kids having an argument. And now you've just seen this email ping in that you've been really dreading. And so now that feels like danger, because the problem is we've got no resilience, right? So even an email these days, our body has stopped knowing the difference between there's an actual saber-toothed tiger behind me and I'm in so much overwhelm with so little bandwidth that I can't handle this extra pressure. So the message comes again and it keeps coming and it keeps coming, or I've eaten food I'm intolerant to. And so after a while, this negative feedback loop, this red line just gets switched off because the adrenals are like, well, I don't know what's going on. And the only message that keeps being sent is make cortisol, make cortisol, make cortisol. So this is called the HPA, the hypothalamus, pituitary and adrenal axis conversation. And when it becomes affected, like we were just talking about, where this feedback loop gets switched off, it's called the HPA axis dysregulation. And this is ultimately what is behind the inflammatory conditions that we are seeing. It's people being in this HPA axis dysregulation that is causing the precursors, the niggles, the issues, and then, the blood sugar instabilities because cortisol is being produced all day, every day. And so there are a myriad of problems within this, but at the basic level, cortisol, as Laura was saying, it gives you that heartbeat feeling. It's to get us to run away. So we've got two sides to our nervous system. We've got the get up and go, get going. That's the sympathetic nervous system. And we've got the wind down and relax and also get jiggy with it and digest. That's the parasympathetic nervous system. Now we're supposed to spend big chunks of time in parasympathetic nervous system and only need the sympathetic, when we need it. So we're supposed to have this chilled out and then get going. That has completely switched on its head. And when we're in an HPA axis dysregulation, we are only in sympathetic response. Now that means we can't digest our food. It means we're making all this cortisol all the time. We aren't able to breathe properly, all of those things that are there. Like our body is in this constant state of stress. And so because it's in a constant state of stress, we're producing more cortisol. And then this is where we end up with things like the allergies getting bigger, more and more and more, because I'm now in a stress response, trying to eat something, have got no bandwidth, and also not making any digestive enzymes to even digest my food. So even if I could digest it, I can't break it down. So I might be actually having an intolerance reaction to something I'm not truly intolerant to. And our body just ends up in this spiral of not digesting, not absorbing, in more stress, not able to relax. And we end up with these chronic conditions.
So I think when it comes to food intolerances, people get food, it just kind of gives me energy and it's just a filler for the day and it just keeps me going. And it's not that important. When you start to put it into this much bigger map of how it has this knock-on effect with the rest of the body, you can see how the food that we eat absolutely affects everything.
So a real classic actually is people saying, I get real alarm bells when someone says, oh, I have my lunch and then I'm really sleepy at about 3 o'clock. And I'm like, it's food intolerance. That is the classic. Your body has gone high with the cortisol, and then it's dropped off. It's just literally gone, okay, now I'm having a cortisol crash. It's literally an adrenaline and cortisol crash. And so then we reach for more food because we're really tired. So the coffee, maybe with some sugar in it, a biscuit, we're reaching for the foods that are going to keep us high. That's ultimately, we become adrenaline junkies. We start to make decisions based on how to stay in the adrenaline response, which is unreal, adrenaline and cortisol response. And this becomes an even bigger issue when we go back to, so we've talked about the blood sugars, we've talked about the stress, it becomes an even bigger issue when we start to talk about the sex hormones, because our ovaries and our testes aren't the only place that we make our sex hormones. So progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen for women, testosterone for men. We also make them in our adrenal glands. So this is like background of these hormones. And so this is why we're seeing so many horrendous menopause symptoms coming to the fore now. I'm not just talking about menopause here. It's really important. In our adrenal glands, we make adrenaline and noradrenaline. And we also make aldosterone. Now, thinking back to that slide at the beginning, where blood pressure, one of the most medicated conditions, this is fascinating. Aldosterone is a hormone that regulates blood pressure and fluid retention. So blood pressure, unless someone has actually got a structural heart or vein issue, which isn't so common, usually the blood pressure issue is coming from the adrenal glands. So that's really important. It's because the adrenal glands are so stressed that the aldosterone signals all get muddled up. But the bit we want to bring your attention to, I just love that bit so much, that was such an aha moment as well, is that in the adrenal glands, we take cholesterol, aka fat. So the low fat diets have not done humans any good whatsoever. We take cholesterol, we make a hormone called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is a precursor hormone. It can make a couple of other hormones, one of which is progesterone, which is a calming hormone, calming. And then it also goes on to make DHEA, which is vitality and sort of lusciousness. Lots of lovely things happen with DHEA. And then DHEA goes on to make testosterone and estrogen, and so does the progesterone. But if we are stressed or have a stressor going on around the human body or in the human body, i.e. eating food that we are intolerant to, the body will not make those hormones and it will turn them to cortisol. It will make cortisol instead of those hormones, because it's less important to have sex hormones in the body than it is to have the survival hormone, the one that is going to get us out of trouble. So we are basically creating a cortisol soup.
Another soup. Now I'm aware we've got about 10 minutes left and we've got there's so much juicy stuff to do. We need to get onto the food. This is something that Claire and I put our heads together and created. What I love about it is this was work that we did with a gastroenterologist as well, who helped us build the theory around the IBS is a hormone issue. It is actually not a bowel issue. And this shows that the soup, the hormone soup that we're in, causes more food intolerances and causes more IBS. So we start at the top with the blood sugar instability with eating foods that we're intolerant to, and this insulin. It also has a knock-on effect with motilin, which is the hormone that helps all of our food move through the digestive system, particularly the small intestine. This has a knock-on effect. Any of you kinesiologists out there who know the ileocecal valve, which is an important mechanism in the bowel to help our stools move through, that ICV connection starts to go off, is massively connected with blood sugar instability. And also with that blood sugar instability, we're releasing our adrenaline and cortisol. When there's high adrenaline and cortisol, we have a reduced enzyme and acid production. So this is where we're starting to get heartburn, where we're starting to get acid reflux. And with that adrenaline and cortisol, we then, like Claire was saying, we get the low progesterone, the low testosterone, and higher estrogen. Estrogen is a stimulator. So the stress is increasing the estrogen and lowering the progesterone. This in turn boosts serotonin. Serotonin is a hormone that we recognize as really lovely feel good, but it also stimulates pain in the bowel. So this is where we're starting to see more IBS symptoms. As our progesterone goes down, our estrogen's going up, we get an elevated histamine response and inflammation. And so this is where we often see things like allergies and hives and skin itching, and responses, food allergies start to increase because of
Skin
this.
issues.
There are massive skin issues, histamine and this hormone connection. The liver becomes overwhelmed. The liver's job has 300 jobs, but one of the jobs is to clear out the hormones. And so what we start to see is a buildup of estrogen, a buildup of cortisol, a buildup of serotonin, which causes more stress in the body. So then we're getting more adrenaline and cortisol, which causes more IBS, which causes erratic eating, which causes blood sugar instability. So you can see that by putting the wrong foods in at the beginning of the chain, we have this knock-on effect that just spirals and just keeps going and going and going.
And what's really interesting is the more unwell people are, the more they eat things like, I'll just have a bit of toast,
because I can't digest anything else.
We're going to talk to you about the foods, so get going quickly. So
yes.
The problem with the bowel hormone storm is that it causes a gut microbiome disruption. And so, 40,000 parasites, 5 million fungi, 300,000 bacteria in the body. Very important. The gut microbiome is highly sensitive to refined carbs, pesticides, medication, and food intolerances. So it starts to, when it's disrupted, these bacteria actually start to produce something called endotoxins, which cause inflammation and immune responses. And we also know in anxiety, one of the most medicated conditions, that there are higher levels of endotoxins in the blood of people that have high anxiety. So we really have to start looking at the gut microbiome. And this inflammation contributes to a leaky gut and this dysbiosis of the gut microbiome, including small intestine bacterial overgrowth and small intestine fungal overgrowth, which then inhibits our absorption of nutrients. So it just becomes this sort of big toxic sludge.
We're back to the soup.
Soups.
So let's start looking at food, the problem with modern diets. Well, this is the food pyramid, which was launched in 1994 in the UK. There's equivalents in other countries and in the US. And it was revised in 2007 and renamed the Eat Well plate. And the difficulty with this plate is the huge quantity of carbohydrates is one, but also the huge quantity of potential food intolerances. And when your clients are given the message that this is the way that they should be eating, and they've possibly been eating this way for many, many years, this is a huge inflammation soup happening here. We will go into details of and look at these individual foods to show how the food intolerances are coming about. This is what we're up against, is that is considered healthy food. Yeah. Now, I wanted to start by addressing processed foods. We don't talk about processed foods being food intolerances. It is just a no-go. With your clients, if they're eating processed foods, and the way to think of it in a supermarket, you want your clients shopping on the outside of the supermarket. You want the fresh fruit and veg, you want the deli with the meats and the eggs, and you want the frozen peas, I guess, is down the other side, isn't it? But you want to avoid, what I'm trying to say here is, what you want to avoid is that middle of the supermarket with the breads and the cookies and the crisps and any of these foods that have these really long shelf lives, and they are refined carbohydrates, artificial ingredients, full of trans fats, have no nutritional quality. They now account for 25 to 60% of a person's daily energy intake. It's a huge problem. And I'm a mother of a 4-year-old, and I am seeing his friends eating these foods are being marketed as health foods. If they're highly processed, they are going to be causing inflammation in the body. So then they're not, we don't class them as a food intolerance, but they are absolutely at the bottom of the food hierarchy that we need to be getting them out of the diets. So this is something that Claire and I created a few years ago that is it's called the food intolerance hierarchy, and it is a staged approach. And it's a great way to work with your clients, depending on their symptoms, depending on who they are, what they're coming for, and their health profile. You can start at the bottom with the gateway allergens, which we'll go into more detail in a moment. And someone can cut wheat and milk out of their diet and everything gets sorted. They just feel amazing. They think you're the best thing since not eating sliced bread. And that solves the problem. However, because we are getting clients who are really quite ill, they potentially might have to give up more and more foods. And this is where we go through the hierarchy one by one in these different stages to identify, okay, what is causing the problem.
So I just want to say, we didn't just sit there and make it up. This does actually come from, it's a combination of things like the autoimmune protocol, which has areas which now research shows are a bit out of date. And so this really comes from the cutting edge of what we now know as being sort of stages of food intolerances. And the reason it's a staged approach is because, like I said, you could cut out wheat and milk and everything changes, and or it doesn't. And then if it doesn't, you go, okay, I know where to go next. Now, the problem with having a hair test for food intolerances is it might say 60 things that you're intolerant to, which is really overwhelming, and it doesn't really translate. So someone sits there and says, well, yes, I'm intolerant to kiwis. And I go, well, how often do you eat kiwis? They say, well, I never eat kiwis. And I'm like, well, then it's not that that's causing you to be unwell, is it? It's got to be something that you're eating every day. What you're doing every day is the problem. And so we go in the order, firstly, of how much exposure there is, because we come back to this dose and exposure. And then we start to work up the chain, basically, because by taking away the gateways, or the next step, everything else can change. So I was originally intolerant to like 30 different things, but I used to think I could eat wheat fine. I still crippled, bent over double with horrendous IBS and migraines. But by taking out the gateway allergens, my immune system was able to change. And then you can start to see the wood for the trees. Then you can start to go, okay, so is it all grains? No, it's not this one. Okay, is it all dairy? Okay, no, it's not yogurt, for example. Is it all the nightshades? No, it's not whatever. So we work in the staged approach to give the immune system, rather than take everything out, which is really overwhelming and not also very necessary, we go in this staged approach to see really what is the core hierarchy for each individual.
Okay, wheat. What is the problem with wheat? I thoroughly recommend that you watch the film What's Up with Wheat. That goes into so much detail about this. This is Norman Borlaug, who won a Nobel Prize in 1970 and is known as the man who saved 1 billion lives because he developed the modern dwarf wheat grain that was disease resistant, had great growing potential and high yield. And what was not uncovered when he developed the dwarf wheat grain is how bad it is for nutrition. It has a significantly decreased mineral content. The original grains had much higher levels of selenium, zinc, magnesium, and that they are now missing. It also increased the gluten content, and the word gluten means glue in Latin, so it just made wheat a hell of a lot stickier in our guts and on our joints for our health. Also, the other problem with wheat is how many preservatives are now used to be able to keep it shelf stable for so much longer. And it's heavily processed, so all of the bran and the germ is removed. And so this is the white grain that many people eat. And it is a Franken grain. It is not fit for human consumption. And we get wheat in bread and bagels and pasta and cereal and pizza and baked goods. And it is amazing how many people eat this 3 times a day. And
5 times a day.
Oh, and when we see our client health history forms come back, the first thing I look at is what are you eating breakfast, lunch and dinner. And it is amazing how many people are having toast for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch and pasta for dinner. And so actually, as a practitioner, it can be an easy fix. I go, right, we're looking at a wheat intolerance here. So there are also other issues with wheat. We have it's high in phytates, which prevents the absorption of essential minerals. So not only is there no minerals now in wheat, but it is now stopping us absorbing the minerals from the rest of our food. There's also something called lectins in there, which is it helps protect the plant, but it irritates and damages the gut. It's a processed carbohydrate. It causes inflammation. I will let Claire talk about the arsenic glyphosate.
Yeah, so that was the issue in 1970 with Norman Borlaug. Then in 1980s, we started spraying wheat with a pesticide called glyphosate. Now, glyphosate is basically Monsanto's Roundup, and it's an antimicrobial, which sounds great when you're trying to keep, high crop yield and disease resistance, but it's not great when you go back to that slide where we just talked to you about the bajillions of bacteria that are living in our gut, that form our immune system, that form our gut microbiome, that form basically the cornerstone of our health. So when we eat glyphosate, we are eating essentially an antibiotic that is destroying our gut microbiome, which leads to high levels of inflammation. I mean, every single time, if you're eating that 5 times a day, glyphosate, 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 and wheat is heavily, heavily, heavily sprayed at the beginning, middle, and it's sprayed very, very much at the end to dry it out, not even just for the microbial issues, to dry it out so it can be more easily processed. So basically, I call wheat arsenic. Whichever way you slice it, pun intended, it's arsenic. So people will say to me, okay, well, I'm eating organic wheat. And I go, okay, well, that's the wheat that's been, that's still the dwarf wheat variety, but it's got no glyphosate on it. So it's still got the high gluten, so the phytates and the lectins, so it's still a gut irritant. And then they go, okay, right. Then someone else will say, well, I have sourdough. So I say, so the original, that's still arsenic. Yeah. Okay, well, sourdough, well, that's just fermented wheat. So that's just arsenic that's been fermented. So there is no way to eat wheat without having these problems. It's not all grain. Like the gluten-free thing is great and all, but it's not all grains unless you're a celiac. Barley, rye, spelt, these are indigenous grains that a lot of people can tolerate and can be great, but some people are in such an inflammatory response they can't tolerate them for years and years and years and years. So wheat is arsenic. Sometimes people go, oh yeah, I've been told I've had a food intolerance to wheat, and I go, what did you do about it? And they say nothing, and I go, okay, it's arsenic, and I just drum it home, and I go, right, okay, I get it now.
So the next stage on the food hierarchy is grains. Like Claire said, some people, you cut out the wheat, they can tolerate other grains, some people cannot. And that is, so when we're talking about grains, we're looking at oats, rice, rye, and spelt. There are plenty of others, but those are the biggies that people eat. Again, they contain the lectins, part of the plant's natural defense system that is just inflammatory. And these lectins contain protease inhibitors, which stop our digestive enzymes. So they are inhibiting our ability to digest from the get-go. They also, lectins also trick the cells in the lining of the gut to trick the body into thinking that it's a simple sugar. So then the lectins are absorbed into the bloodstream, and this is a big thing that contributes towards leaky gut and an immune response. So any of your clients you are seeing who are struggling with immune symptoms like autoimmune, you're going to be thinking leaky gut, and we've got to be working with the gut. And if we're working with the gut, we've got to be working with food intolerances.
And that's the thing, especially from the PT world or some of the functional nutritional world, is they'll talk about complex carbohydrates. And I'm like, yeah, but if you've got grains in there or rice, it's tricking the body to believe it's a simple carbohydrate. So it's acting like a simple carbohydrate. So it's not, it doesn't work. That science is flawed.
And gluten is the most damaging of the lectins that are in the grains. And the reason that it is so damaging is that it closely resembles our proteins in the human body. So the body then starts to attack the gluten, and it then starts to also attack the human body because it mistakes it for so cutting out gluten and cutting out the grains can be huge for people with autoimmune conditions.
And this is where we can start to go, okay, autoimmune diseases in the 80s, before we started the glyphosate, but we did still have the Norman Borlaug issue. We had 80 known autoimmune diseases. We've got over 300 now. This is, where it's coming from.
Okay, then we've got dairy. Milk is the biggest offender. If you're going to work with your clients to cut dairy out and they are quite resistant and want to take it in a staged approach, cut the milk out first. But many people do need to cut dairy out. We don't have the enzyme lactase to be able to break dairy down. In raw dairy, there is the enzyme lactase that assists our digestion, but the dairy that we're eating, so the highly processed dairy, it just doesn't have, and our bodies don't have the enzymes to be able to break it down. So it can often be a food intolerance. One of the flip sides with dairy, it can be an excellent source of fat and fat-soluble vitamins, but because so many people are intolerant to it, it is something that we need to consider as a food intolerance. And one of the fascinating things about dairy, I'm so aware of time, is that it increases an enzyme in the body called trypsin, which actually contributes to leaky gut. Now, it's something that is meant to happen in nature. It is meant to happen in babies who are meant to be having dairy, they're meant to be having breast milk, because that leaky gut is designed to be able to flood the body with nutrition. But as an adult, leaky gut is incredibly damaging and leads on to so many other conditions like autoimmune.
So nightshades are nightshades are an interesting one because these can very quickly build up a big part of someone's diet. So tomatoes, peppers, chilies, white potatoes, and aubergine. In fact, some diets in the world are basically based on this food. Again, it contains the lectins and contains these chemicals that are detergent-like. And they start to interact with the fat molecules, the cholesterol molecules of every cell in the body and disrupt them, especially in the gut wall. So very, very aggravating. Hinders the growth of probiotic bacteria strains while stimulating the overgrowth of some gram-negative bacteria. And so it's that gram-negative bacteria that we start looking at when we're looking at the SIBOs, the bacterial overgrowth. And then this exaggerated immune response because of the stimulating chemicals. And what we get with nightshades is these are definitely where this is where the hierarchy is so brilliant, because this is one of those things where someone goes, well, I've given up milk and wheat, and I go, but I'm still getting these horrendous symptoms. And you go, you say you have salad every day, tell me what goes in it. And they say peppers and tomatoes, and you're like, ah, okay, that's great, because now we know where to go next.
Eggs can be an amazing health food for some, and they can be a massive food intolerance or allergy for others. And it is mainly the egg whites that are the problem with the protein or the enzyme lysozyme, which crosses the gut bacteria and triggers an immune response. And it's not necessarily the lysozyme that is the problem, it's the other proteins in the egg piggyback on the lysozyme, and then that triggers an immune response in the bloodstream. Egg yolks are a different matter. They tend to be better tolerated. So if you're working with a client, you can look at eliminating egg whites first of all, and maybe keeping in the egg yolks, or you can go with the approach of let's cut the eggs out and see if we get an improvement. Legumes and beans, they are a high FODMAP. So this is something that we work with the microbiome in our digestive module. FODMAPs are simple carbohydrates that stimulate bacteria in the small intestine and cause symptoms like IBS. And they are also high in oxalates, which naturally occur in plants, but unfortunately they bind to calcium. And so they pull a lot of the minerals, not just calcium, out of the body and cause inflammation. So when we're working with particularly vegans and they're using legumes and beans as a form of protein, having that communication and a conversation with them around it, be it if they've got digestive issues, about it being a high FODMAP containing oxalates, and this issue that they can be very inflammatory, can be really important. Nuts and seeds also are high in oxalates. They also have phytic acid in it, which contributes to things like anemia and zinc deficiency, magnesium deficiency, and a lack of calcium. Nuts and seeds are also high in omega-6. This also raises blood pressure. It affects blood sugar balancing, so can contribute to diabetes, and it can also contribute towards heart issues and the body retaining water. Our approach when we're looking at food is that we want to increase the levels of omega-3, or at least get it balanced. And when we've got a diet that's high in omega-6, as well as those oxalates, then we're seeing this high inflammation picture. And then finally, at the top of the hierarchy, we've got alliums, which is your onions, shallots, chives, spring onions, garlics, leeks. And what I think is so challenging about this is that we often get the communication that garlic and onions and leeks are really amazing health foods. And so we often get clients who are adding them in on a daily basis into their diets. However, they are a high FODMAP, so there's simple sugars that's in the small intestine, so they often contribute to digestive upset. And so we can see clients who have got IBS symptoms. By removing alliums, they are going to start seeing an improvement in symptoms and get that stress down. That is the most important thing that we were talking at the beginning of this presentation. I think we've covered this. This is the intolerance and allergy testings that actually many clients go and have food allergy and food intolerance tests. And if they're still eating things like the gateway allergens, then they could get this huge list of foods for them to avoid, which doesn't actually tell them a lot. Is that having this approach of, okay, right, let's start at the bottom of the hierarchy and cut these foods out first and see where we are. This is what I love to do with all our lab testing, is I want to be getting the stress down. I want to be getting the blood sugars balanced. I want to be getting you digesting. I want to be balancing your hormones. I want to be able to calm the immune system. And then if I can't get underneath something, then I want to be looking at spending money on doing lab tests. But I need to get those foundations in place first. So we like to work with the hierarchy. And if they cut those foods out and they're still not seeing improvement, then we can go elsewhere.
So what are you eating every day? Because the clue is in there. Is it nuts? Is it seeds? Is it the grains? Is it the various different types of dairy? This is when there are continuous symptoms. We've got to be looking at what is going on in their diet. Are they eating balanced? So by balanced, this is what the fundamentals of what we teach: proteins, fats, the right carbohydrates. Are they eating food they're intolerant to? What is their stress? And is there a sex hormone dysregulation for a variety of reasons, including medications? And then taking your client on a dietary pathway of elimination. That is really what this is all about. So first of all, we're going to remove the gateway allergens. And we're also going to balance the micronutrients, so proteins, fats, and carbs. That is essential. So we cover that in our Nutrition for Health. We cover that in all of the diplomas. That's the foundation of what we do. Then we start to tweak it as people aren't, if they're not getting well. So for so many people, I mean, God, dozens, hundreds of people, just go onto PFC and take out the gateway allergens. Life's amazing. All of their symptoms disappear and life is great. We only need to start to get further down this chain as people are, if they're not getting their symptoms fixed. This is where everything was missing for me and everything was missing for Laura, was somebody actually going, okay, there is a pathway here. So then we've got to remove the cortisol stimulators such as caffeine and alcohol. And during this, we're also moving through that food intolerance hierarchy. So now we're going to go, okay, let's look at the nightshades, look at this. Then we're going to start looking at hormone resetting. So fasting, fat tailoring, and low carb. And then we start to go on to the microbiome repair. So this is based on the autoimmune protocols and FODMAP. And at the very, very end of the chain, for the really stubborn cases like me, we end up doing the systemic resets, which are basically, it's the meat-based protocols with complete allergen elimination to stop there being any responses in the gut, to completely heal that gut, to get, you know, any of those endotoxins out and that autoimmune and the immune response reduced, so that we can then start to rebuild and find out and put things back in. It's not about staying, you know, forever on a meat-based protocol. It's about going, okay, now we start to put things back in so that we can find out what you can actually eat and isn't something that you're intolerant to. And I love having this diet pathway, because someone comes in and they go, oh, well, I did the PFC and I gave up wheat and nothing's different. And you go, it's the first step. We've got so many tools in this toolkit. That's the first step. It's the first step.
So that is the end of the presentation. I hope that you have taken on board how important it is to get food intolerances. In that first session, when you're seeing your client, we have got to talk about what you're eating and get that in place first before anything else can can shift and change. So we're going to sign off and say bye-bye on this presentation. I'm going to press pause. And we are going to open up.
Stop the recording.
Thank you. I have.
No, still got the red flashing.